Please now join me in welcoming the founder of the Favorite Poem Project, Professor Robert Pinsky.
Thank you, Annette. It is my job to explain the nature of this occasion, and I can do it by paying tribute to the late Nancy Livingston, who, through the Shenson Foundation, with her husband Fred Levin, told me how to do this. They wanted to endow a series, and I explained the great BU legend of the room across the street, room 222. It's the room which still Carl Kirchway and I and Nicole Seeley and Hodgin and Leslie Epstein and many other people teach the creative writing classes in a little room across the street. In that room, Robert Lowell taught a creative writing class in which the students included George Starbuck, who later taught here for years, Sylvia Plath, and Anne Sexton. And Nancy, whose profession was advertising, she was the kind of incisive person who didn't like terms like public relations or promotion. She said, I'm in advertising. She said, it should be in the spirit of that room. I realized that was true, that in that room there was the academic structure or umbrella in which we still have our classes, but they were artists together. It isn't that it was Professor Lowell and his students. He did his job as a teacher. They did theirs as students. But in the legend, they went out drinking afterwards. And the spirit was, in art, there's a much more demanding discipline and a much more exacting set of standards than in the mere world of A and B minus and D and assistant associate professor or superior engorged professor and so forth. The way we set it up in that spirit is that we have a BU alum, a recent alum, in this case Kirun Kapur, introduce our distinguished guest, in this case, thrillingly, the wonderful poet Tracy K Smith. I'll say a few words about Kirun, and Kirun will give a reading, and then she will introduce Tracy. Kirun's new book, Women in the Waiting Room, her second book, is thrilling to me. Her first book was wonderful, was very good. This book is at another level, and we were talking about it in my class the other day, just as an examples of how you put a structure together in a book, and also how you can take up serious social issues without seeming superior in attitude yourself. And I well remember the class in which Kirun was a student here. Many books have come out of that class. And I believe Dylan Tracy was there and his sort of aggressive literary criticism, Rachel Dwoskin, who's published fiction as well as poetry, Frederick Spears, and it was that same collegial feeling. And on Kirun's part, as with the book, in that group of leaders together, my memory of Kirun's role in the discussions and in her poems was to always avoid expectation and stereotype, to always do something that adds another angle or another way of looking at it. And that will now be demonstrated to you. Thanks.
Hello, far-flung people. It's a scatter. It is a special kind of pleasure and joy to be here tonight, knowing that you're in person for the first time after so long, but also because it feels special to read with someone who was your teacher and mentor and whose work has mattered to me for so many years. It's also lovely to see you all, knowing that you will know each other and be in each other's lives as poet friends for so many years to come. Robert mentioned a few poets who were in my class here, and we still read and talk and think together all the time. And my hope for you is that you will find those people here and continue to do that. If I think about one thing that has mattered most about my writing life, it's those relationships and the way they help you stay the course in a way that you might not otherwise. So all that said, I'm just going to do something very expected, which is to start at the beginning, both in the sense that I'm going to start with a poem that opens the book, and in the sense that these first two poems are beginning stories, foundational stories. This first one thinks a little bit about the great Hindu epic poem, the Ramayana, which takes its name from Lord Ram, but is also very much about his wife, Sita. And in the course of the poem, Sita is carried away by a demon. On looking at myself in the mirror, or rereading Valmiki's Ramayana, anyone can disappear across the black water. Every girl can be taught. Her middle name is shame. When will I burn the urge for purity? My bones are a furnace. My face is a game. Every girl steals away with a demon at some point. All her alphabets, ankle bells, all her braids. She will meet herself in the third person. She will lie with her fear. She will dress in her rage. The world is curdled with husbands, blue as the gods, gentle as flame. The Annunciation. It will come down to he said, she said, the color of sunlight and shade, what could be heard from the street, whether the spider lilies were still blooming. The great I am, spoken by one, swallowed in silence by the other. Many times a day, she will try to think of lying there, his shadow crossed over her, but will conjure nothing. Other times she will wake with the feel of a tongue wet in her ear, though she sat for hours on the shower floor, scrubbing her face away. Behold, a word of witness. So much went unrecorded between the girl and the angel. Did it pour down like honey? Did it sting? The soul, whatever it is, struggles to articulate. She can still go to that place where nothing grows, where her mind has nothing in it, and only breath ties her to the world with a blue hair ribbon. The movement of the soul towards articulation is slow. No official complaint has been recorded. It is known that she was clutching a book, that through the whole ordeal she kept one finger in the page. Behold, a word of holding steady, in the mind, in the eye. Later they will ask why she didn't drop it, use it to push him away. No, it was not the first time she had been in his garden. Yes, willingly, she may have claimed to be his. It felt good to be held until she felt nothing. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and read a love poem. This is called In the Rub al-Khali, which is the largest contiguous sand desert in the world. And Muscat, of course, is the capital of Oman, which borders that desert. 1, you'll want to cover yourself. The morning cry from the muezzin strips the sky. Ptolemy was first to reveal the desert's entry gate, calling Muscat hidden harbor. You believe all any person wants is to be seen, but here you stand under a cloudless eye and know how Eve and Adam felt. Sweet and tart fruit lashed their mouths, transforming them, bare to exposed. Wrap up your frankincense, your bridal chest of meteor stones, in layer after layer of earthly cloth. When the day has glazed you in its kiln, when you are the only vertical line crossing the horizon, it's a relief to kneel, drench your face in fine red sand. Let's feed each other a bowl of dates. Let's build a courtyard garden surrounded by high walls. Before the first prayer ends and dawn blinds us with its charge, let's trap the darkness, love, hold all its stars under our shawls. 2. If satellites patrol our heaven, if beetles leave encrypted tracks around our sleeping mats for 1,000 mornings, if our story orbits back to when the desert was the ocean, if you put your mouth to me like a jellyfish, like a diesel kiss, like I am a bottle of well water, if we crush each other like a reef whose happy ending is to be reborn as dunes, beloved, caravan, sweet eon, wind erosion, if it hasn't rained in years, we'll live on miraculous green shoots as when our vows were new. I'm going to end with a poem that's a little closer to home. I moved to a town that has 2 rivers in it some years ago, and found myself really obsessed with the rivers and their movements. I grew up in a place with lots of water, surrounded by water on an island, but the river is a different thing. It's like a creature, an animal, and I find myself checking what it's doing all the time. This is called Let Me Be as a River. Nothing but motion, muck-mouthed, mud-hearted, brackish, all dirty at the lip, with rise and fall that exposes hull-gouging stones. No curiosity about source, no knowledge of destination, just willingness to bear anything right to the end. Silver as fish skin, 1 hour wrinkled, 2 hours smooth, duck-fouled, trash-choked, silent, then gossiping under a full red moon. Let me be dredged when the leggy girls go missing, used for a slow cruise, churned for speed, reeking of the unseen ocean, then veiled in the scent of pine trees, a fog in the head, or clear as the tip of a pin, enough beauty to draw blood, enough anger to strip the banks, enough fullness to carry the pleasure boats high. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Tracy K Smith, one of those rare poets who doesn't need much introduction, especially in a room like this. As most of you will already know, she is the author of 4 award-winning collections of poetry, including Duende, which received the James Laughlin Award, Life on Mars, which received the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, and the recent Wade in the Water, which won the Anisfield Wolf Book Award. She's edited numerous anthologies and co-translated poems from Chinese. Her memoir, Ordinary Light, was the finalist for the National Book Award in Nonfiction. Tracy served 2 terms as U.S. Poet Laureate, during which time she launched the acclaimed and much-loved podcast, The Slowdown. I first encountered Tracy's poems in Duende, her second book. I was instantly fascinated by the tension between the epic and the intimate, between profound abstraction and embodied specificity. In the opening poem, she writes, "There is Pangu, dog god, his only verb to grow. And when he dies, history happens. His body becomes word, blood, eye, tendon, teeth. I marveled at the way the rhyme shifted and flexed over the lines, crossed and lost, knees and reason, the word God, which pings off of word and world and other and body, but rhymes only with itself. Lines like flesh is the first literature stayed with me. Subsequent books have roamed over wide terrain: music, science fiction, race, religion, history, the family, political resistance, divorce, joy, and desire. Her modes, too, have been varied and plenty, ranging from elegy and ode to documentary poetics, including found poems and erasures. But that blend of music and mystery, that tension between the vast and otherworldly and the physical here and now, continues to be a marvel. In a time when our human epic, and maybe particularly our American epic, feels grim and impossible, it's lucky that we get to hear from this poet, drawing us across that vastness, across language and space and time, toward the wonder of incarnation. Please welcome Tracy K Smith.
Thank you so much. What an exquisite reading, Kirun, and what a generous introduction. Thank you. I'm excited to be in the space with, I think, my kin, my brethren, people who will come out for poetry and go home to poetry and wake up to it as food and community. So thanks for being here tonight. I feel so lucky to be in this area. When I was an undergrad 30 years ago across the river, I felt like Boston and people like Robert gave me the world that I wanted to belong to. This was the place where I came to my first poetry readings, where I realized poets were living beings who ate and, walked around. And I also understood that what I had always just loved about language, the sound, the energy, was actually a tool for understanding and recognizing even things that don't, or especially things that don't fit into the ordinary sense that we're encouraged to be faithful to. So I feel like just extraordinarily happy and humbled to be in this space. Time feels like it's looping around to touch itself for me right now. Maybe I will read some of the new work in Such Color, which is a new and selected edition. I think the new poems in this book encouraged me to go back through my body of work, listening for certain commitments. Race and racial justice is one of them. But I think the largeness of that private interior space at the center of a life that is marked by the effects of race is something that has been important to me. And these poems maybe help me to recognize glimmers of it in the earlier work. But I'll start with a poem that is quiet. Maybe it bears witness to a feeling that I hope it's not, but I imagine it's familiar from the 2020, the 2.5 long year of 2020. This is called Bee on a Sill, B-E-E, on a sill. Bee on a sill submits to its own weight, the bulb of itself too full, too weak, or too wise to lift and go. And something blunt in me remembers the old charade about putting a thing out of its misery. For it, for me, Sleep be deep and easy. Hive, heave, give, grieve. Then rise when you're ready from your soul's hard floor to sweet work or some war. One of my dear friends passed away this past fall. Camila Aisha Moon, a wonderful poet and huge-hearted and huge-conscienced person. During the pandemic, she lost her mother, and I remember sitting outside thinking about her and thinking that Aisha's mother and my mother maybe knew each other now off somewhere. I lost my mother when I was in my 20s, and that thought gave me just like a little bit of comfort. And then the thought sort of stretched itself a little bit and said, well, if they know each other, all the mothers know each other. What are you going to do with that? And that felt like a wrinkle that was worth engaging. So this is a poem called Mothership. You cannot see the mothership in space. It and she being made of the same thing. All our mothers hover there in the ceaseless blue-black, watching it ripple and dim to the prized pale blue in which we spin, we who are black, and you too. Our mothers know each other there, fully and finally. They see what some here see and call anomaly, the way the sight of me might set off a shiver in another mother's son, a deadly, silent digging in, a stolid refusal to budge, the viral urge to stake out what on solid ground is authority and sometimes also territory. Our mothers, knowing better, call it folly. I taught at Princeton for a long time, for 16 years, and it was in the last summer of my time on the faculty there that the president and the board of trustees decided to remove Woodrow Wilson's name from the School of Public and International Affairs and from an undergraduate residential college. And there had been years of, urging on the part of students to make that change. But of course, 2020 changed our understanding of what harm feels like, what it does, what it activates or amplifies, even just generations old harm. And I was proud to see that change. So I wrote this poem, which uses, it's like a radical erasure, I guess, of an essay that Woodrow Wilson wrote in praise of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. I wanted to hear something that knew better than Wilson perhaps knew in that language. I have this idea that language and time, over time, becomes even language that has been used for small ends is a form that's capable of revealing the large thing that was hidden there. And so that's what I went looking for in this poem. Found poem. It is not necessary to recount his achievements, those things done, not done, in order to serve a simple end. I think it says something that it should have taken so short a time for the whole nation to see the true measure of this man's life. If you love a country that does not does not, was conceived not to want you. I want to remind you. We live. We live. Turn your faces and your hands likewise to the task of life, deep color, ardor of blood. I had the experience, many of these poems kind of were written during the summer of 2020 when, everything that I encountered reminded me of some new facet of, the preponderance of violence that moves toward Black citizens in this country, and the history that authorizes that. I found, even in an article that I read in the New York Times about elephants in Botswana who were dying of a mysterious and unknown ailment, I found the echo of this other story. And so this is another poem that's an erasure of that article. Maybe I should tell you, I should remember the name. The journalist's name is Rachel Newer, and the article is called 365 Elephants Died Suddenly. The Cause is a Mystery. And that was July 6, 2020. And so there are blank spaces in this poem. It almost looks like a Mad Lib or something like that. The elephant in the poem. Some appeared to have died suddenly, collapsing chest first while walking or running. Experts are left with few clues as to whether the cause is something sinister, such as, or a naturally occurring disease from which the areas will bounce back. As populations grow, it is more likely that you will get mass die-offs, probably on a bigger scale than this. Death comes to all living things. The important thing now is to identify what is causing the deaths. Researchers observed some that appeared disoriented, including one that was walking in circles. Others were dragging their legs as though paralyzed, and still others appeared lethargic and emaciated. Males and females, old and young, all seem equally affected. Many still consider the country a safe haven for. At this point, the deaths do not constitute a crisis. This is a poem called Soul Work. Maybe the other thing that is important, I think, to recognize or to admit, maybe admit is the right verb. The fear, the anger, I don't know what the feelings are, that I felt really buried or burdened by during that year of being alone at home with family and knowing that others were in a similar kind of enclosure, recognizing something that was at once extremely old, age-old, embedded in the fabric of our nation, but also in some ways new because of the ways that we are able to see and re-see this happening. And then some of the conflict that arises in intimate, friendly, familiar spaces when you start talking about questions of racism. All of that felt, terrible. And also really important. And one of the things that helped me to just wake up and keep going and try and recognize that I was learning something and capable of seeing and saying things within this was a meditation practice. Sitting in my yard, if it was, possible, and listening to birds and trees, and then going to a place where it felt like I was capable of listening to others that were not me and not my unconscious, but I don't know, souls, ancestors, those credible feeling dialogues brought something else into the work that I produced. I'll read a couple of poems that emerge out of that process. I feel really grateful for this. Maybe I'll start with one that feels sort of big in a way, called Riot. And of course, a poem called Riot is also hoping that Gwendolyn Brooks is one of those others out there helping. Riot. Sometimes I feel the black in my heart like a map made of tar. You need only part your lips to mar what isn't yours. Think better. Don't bother. Your druthers clog my sieve is the matter. We pay to live. Our nerves carry a charge. We grieve each day. We pray for you. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. How thick is memory? How deep the grave? Thick is memory. Deep the grave. How many are we? Many are we? What have we been led here to learn, to teach? We have been led here to learn, to teach. Is life within our grasp? Life within is in our grasp. Have we ever felt death so near as we do this year? Have we ever? Near, dear, year upon year. The ancestors live upstairs in a room without chairs. When I visit, they welcome me without words. They crouch encircling me. They are without edges. Wordless, they fill me, warmth without weight. I ask for something. Without shame, I beg. They owe me nothing, but they give. They give. Can you hold my death in your mind? Can you leave it there, live and let grieve? I like you. And like you, I move through the days. A dark shape is what my body makes. Good is how I was taught to look, to be, despite what's done to me. Woe is me. To say is to do is also true. Woe is you. This is not the riot. This is reality. It rolls, roils, briefly recoils. It hammers down. We fall, rebound. You chase. We race. You hate. We wait. The wave after wave is one wave, never tiring. Light atop the water, the form in the water, the after image of water, standing, falling, risen over and again. Freedom is labor, to labor at oneself, to keep what is earned, to disappear, reemerge, plunging and carried, lightness and burden. The smallest waves shingle in, are tugged back to surge, to rise, to be swallowed and remain. They are the wet in the sand, spreading in and down, dark center of the old stain. The wave after wave is one wave, never tiring. Freedom is fearsome. A nut drops onto fallen leaves, and my heart leaps. What approaches through this ringing in the trees? And what warning does it carry from the sea? Maybe I'll go backwards a little bit for a moment. In some ways, that meditative process is one way of just changing my vocabulary for the creative process in a way, which I've always said, I'm listening to myself, to my deep, true self. I'm listening to the voices that I've also absorbed. But I've always also been hopeful of listening to something else that's real. And I hear that in so many poems. This is one called The Angels from Wade in the Water that is about something that both was and couldn't possibly have been a dream that I once had. The Angels. Two slung themselves across chairs once in my motel room, grizzled in leather biker gear, emissaries for something I needed to see. I was worn down by an awful panic, a wrenching in the gut, contortions. They sat there at the table while I slept. I could sense them with a deck of playing cards between them. To think of how they smelled, what comes to mind is rum and gasoline. And when they spoke, though I couldn't, I dared not look, I glimpsed how one's teeth were ground down almost to nubs, which makes me hope some might be straight up thugs, young, slim, raw, who bounce and roll with fearsome grace, whose very voices cause faint souls to quake. Quake then, fools, and fall away. What God do you imagine we obey? Think of the toil we must cost them, one scaled perfectly to eternity. And still, they come, telling us through the ages not to fear. Just those two, that once, and never again for me since, though there are there, sightings, flashes, hints, a proud tree in vivid sun, branches swaying in strong wind, rain hurling itself at the roof, boulders, mounds of earth mistaken for dead does, lions in crouch, a rust-stained pipe where a house once stood, which I take each time I pass it for an owl. Bright whorl, so dangerous and near. My mother sat whispering with it at the end of her life, while all the rooms of our house filled up with night. This is a poem called When Your Small Form Tumbled Into Me. It's about my daughter before she was my daughter in a way, and I think that when she was really little, she used to like to hear me read this poem, and now she's an adolescent and she's like, ugh, don't read that. When your small form tumbled into me, I lay sprawled like a big game rug across the bed, belly down, legs wishbone wide. It was winter, workaday. Your father swung his feet to the floor. The kids upstairs dragged something back and forth on shrieking wheels. I was empty, blown through by whatever swells, swirling, and then breaks night after night upon that room. You must have watched for what felt like forever, wanting to be what we passed back and forth between us like fire, wanting weight, desiring desire, dying to descend into flesh, fault, the brief ecstasy of being. From what dream of world did you wriggle free? What soared and what grieved when you aimed your will at the yes of my body, alive like that, on the sheets? The universe as primal scream. 5 p.m. on the nose. They open their mouths and it rolls out, high, shrill, and metallic. First the boy, then his sister. Occasionally, they both let loose at once, and I think of putting on my shoes to go up and see whether it is merely an experiment their parents have been conducting upon the good crystal, which must surely lie shattered to dust on the floor. Maybe the mother is still proud of the 4 pink lungs she nursed to such might. Perhaps if they hit the magic decibel, the whole building will lift off and will ride to glory like Elijah. If this is it, if this is what their cries are cocked toward, let the sky pass from blue to red to molten gold to black. Let the heaven we inherit approach. Whether it is our dead in Old Testament robes or a door opening onto the roiling infinity of space. Whether it will bend down to greet us like a father or swallow us like a furnace. I'm ready to meet what refuses to let us keep anything for long, what teases us with blessings, bends us with grief. Wizard, thief, the great wind rushing to knock our mirrors to the floor, to sweep our short lives clean. How mean our racket seems beside it. My stereo on shuffle, the neighbor chopping onions through a wall. All of it just a hiccup against what may never come for us. And the kids upstairs still at it, screaming like the dawn of man, as if something they have no name for has begun to insist upon being born. I hear so much how grief is such a presence or an occasion for so many of the poems that I write. And then there's this other direction that my imagination is always trying to find new words for, toward this, the mystery. I have parents there in it. Over the past couple of years, I've become aware that I have ancestors in it who have something to say or something to show or teach that can be useful to, what the things that make up our grief, the grief we live with, which is sometimes personal and private and oftentimes, whether we realize it or not, shared, collective, something that we're all carrying and maybe trying to minister to or set right. Maybe I'll read a couple of poems that go back toward that ancestral space, which is a way of saying that go back toward history. I never used to, I never thought of myself as somebody who was comfortable in the archive or who did, wanted to write poems that were, found poems or documentary poems. But this urge to be in dialogue with these others who have much to say has led me to these sources. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll read one poem that is kind of an imagined, an imagined visitation or something by people in the past, people who, there's a record of their lives in archives, but as property, not as mothers and fathers and family members and people who, with dominion over aspects of their lives. I was working on an opera libretto that is concerned with the history of the Sea Islands and land ownership that has historically belonged to Black people since Reconstruction. This is a place where people were able to put money together within communities and purchase land from the government during that brief window when that was possible before that promise was reversed. And these communities are sites of, just deep, long tradition. And because they're so isolated, even the experience of people who were enslaved on these islands, like Sapelo, like Hilton Head, all of the, now resort islands off of the Georgia and South Carolina coast, they were able to live with a stronger connection to the ancestral traditions that they and their ancestors had brought with them from West Africa. And so there's a distinct language, system, and practices that are really recognizably aligned with West African religion and community practice. And these places have been under constant threat. From day 2 of Reconstruction, let's say, people have been trying to get this land back, to buy it back, to steal it, more likely, to levy just unreasonable taxes upon families so that they can no longer afford to maintain the land. Eminent domain has been another force that has taken this land away with the promise that it would be returned, but then, that promise was not kept. And so this is something that I think has bearing upon, our lives even here. If you go to Hilton Head to play golf, you're implicated in this pattern. And if your family moved north, they didn't leave behind those kinds of threats. They encountered redlining. They encountered all of the, violence and intimidation that led to a lot of the riots or uprisings in the 60s. They encountered riots that had nothing to do with their actions, but rather the fact that they were demonstrating wealth and comfort, and that it sort of instigated the ire of their white neighbors who didn't feel that they that was fair or right. So this history, that's a really long way of saying this history is really interesting. It's really relevant. And the archive is a place that I've been turning to. One of the sources that helped me do some of the research for this opera that's thinking in that region, told the story of a white slaveholding family called the Joneses, the Charles Colcock Joneses. Jones was a Presbyterian minister. He was educated at Princeton. And for a short period in his life, he wrestled with guilt over owning slaves and thought, maybe I shouldn't do this. And like many people, found a way of rationalizing and justifying this. There's one family that they held enslaved to them who, at one moment in the correspondence between members of this family, one daughter was kind of escaping and doing things that were setting a bad example. And so they were writing, what should we do with them? And some of the family members' names are Patience and Phoebe. And they decided to sell them, to disband the family as a way of, nipping this problem behavior in the bud. There's no record of Patience and Phoebe and their voices, or there's hardly anything in the archive. And so what I wanted to do again was to imagine that language and time and truth might kind of like exert some energy and allow me to intuit the voices of these women, even within the text of the letters that the Jones family was writing about them. So this is a poem called The Greatest Personal Privation. It opens with an excerpt of a letter from Mary Jones to her cousin, Elizabeth Maxwell. Mary was recovering from an illness in another place, and she said in this letter, "The greatest personal privation I have had to endure has been the want of either Patience or Phoebe. Tell them I am never, if life is spared us, to be without both of them again." So this is a poem that imagines the other voice, the voice bound by that promise or threat. It is a painful and harassing business belonging to her. We have had trouble enough, have no comfort or confidence in them, and they appear unhappy themselves, no doubt from the trouble they have occasioned. They could dispose of the whole family without consulting us. Father, mother, every good cook, washer, and seamstress subject to sale. I believe good shall be glad if we may have hope of the loss of trouble. I remain in glad conscience, at peace with God and the world. I have prayed for those people many, many, very many times. Much as I should miss Mother, I have had trouble enough and wish no more to be only waiting to be sent home in peace with God. In every probability, we may yet discover the whole country will not come back from the sale of parent and child. So far as I can see, the loss is great and increasing. I know they have desired we should not know what was for our own good, but we cannot be all the cause of all that has been done. We wish to act. We may yet, but we have to learn what their character and moral conduct will present. We have it in contemplation to wait and see. If good, we shall be glad. If evil, then we must meet evil as best we can. Father, mother, son, daughter, man. And if that family is sold, please, we cannot, please, we have got to, please, the children, mother and father and husband and all of you, all, I have no more. How soon and unexpectedly cut off, many, many, very many times. Maybe I'll read two more poems, just looking at the time. This one is it's called An Old Story. It's a poem from Wade in the Water, but it gives the title to this collection, Such Color. An old story. We were made to understand it would be terrible. Every small want, every niggling urge, every hate swollen to a kind of epic wind, livid the land and ravaged like a rageful dream. The worst in us having taken over and broken the rest utterly down. A long age passed when at last we knew how little would survive us, how little we had mended or built that was not now lost. Something large and old awoke. And then our singing brought on a different manner of weather. Then animals, long believed gone, crept down from trees. We took new stock of one another. We wept to be reminded of such color. Give you one last little gesture that doesn't cleave so much to the logic that I think dwells in some of those poems that are trying to find something or share something in history. This is a poem called Logos. Safe in the light along the bank, being in believing. No name, only being. On the bank, radiant and blank, safe, watching and seeing. On the brink of the light, blank, no blame in being, waiting, then seeing, breathing in being. Let my voice on the banks along that brink, after the blaze of knowing, that singing. Thank you.